All right, welcome everybody. This is Confucius 3 for Honors 100. So what does this mean if you're just randomly watching this? Hi, we're working our way through the Analects of Confucius. And today, we are starting the meat of the Analects. So we're actually, instead of doing the introduction like the last two classes, we are going to start the content. Now, before we get there, we almost finished the introduction, so we got to finish that off real quick. And then we'll be into the Analects. And today in next class, which is next Tuesday, we'll finish the Analects. So it'll be a good time. Not enough people read this book anymore, especially the amount this poor guy gets attacked. I feel like to attack someone, you should quote them. And if you can't do that, I feel like the attack's dishonest. All right. Here, let me make sure the stream looks like it's working great. We're up. It's live. Are we losing any frames? We're not losing any frames. All right, let's jump on in. All right, last time we left off, I actually checked, we were talking about general theory of Confucian education. And we did learning, and now we're working our way through thinking. And then we stopped here, the 48-49, working our way through kind of the Confucian dialectic, right? So, in dialectic, if you don't know what dialectic means, this will come up again when we get to Plato, and it'll follow through Greek thought, right? So Plato, St. Augustine, and Marcus Aurelius. So dialectic is just a search for truth, right? So how do we find what is true? So let me find my quote here I want. So generally speaking, on 49 and 50, actually I should have said 49 and 50, but on 49 we get these examples from Confucius. He examines existing precepts critically, and then he gleans something general for the problem of the rule and the principle. So for Confucius, at a most basic level, if you're trying to think through rites, so traditions, there's a dialectic that includes what is the rule, but then what is the principle underneath every rule. This is very important for Confucius, because a rule qua rule, and qua is just the way you say in Latin for like rule being rule, right? So rule qua rule doesn't have any moral weight just because it's a rule. And we have that example from last class where we talked about the walking up the stairs. That was on 47, and it was section 9, number 3. So it's that idea that, and in that it's very obvious he doesn't care about the majority, right? The majority is not what matters for the goodness, the righteousness of a rule, but instead the principle behind the rule. Now, this is a part of Confucian thought that D.C. Lau points out, and many modern scholars would not find it correct. What I mean is, Confucius is treated, we'll talk about at the end of the intro, if you read it, you already know, he's like the arch villain of all of Chinese history in the 20th century. But for him, there is an appropriateness of changing in the tradition. Like, the tradition is supposed to update inherently. And he mentions Confucius' critical examination of existing precepts is precisely the subjection of rules to the yardstick of rightness. So then down here, this is on 49. But why should any rule which has been found right in the past be subject to fresh scrutiny? The answer is this. First, a rule once formulated in precise terms cannot adapt itself to changing circumstances. So basically, right, the most precise rule is less useful over time, and then what was right in a previous age need not continue to be right in a subsequent age. And when he's saying rightness here, he does mean, like, if a rule is very precise, it actually goes through time less effectively. So this is actually very common in the United States, right? So one reason stuff like the Constitution and common law is still pretty common in the United States is the commandments try to, like, they try to focus on broad principles, not narrow principles. So same thing with the Bill of Rights, if you look at them, right? They're broad principles, not narrow principles. Because, like, what if a rule says every man must own and clean a musket, right? That is a narrow, specific law, and we no longer use muskets, right? But just if you, like, for example, the Second Amendment, right, talking about arms. So if something is general in the arms sense, then you can't change it. Same thing with the first when it comes to religion, right? It doesn't say, like, Protestant churches exclusively have the right to freedom of religion. It says the freedom of religion shall not be impinged, right? So wording is important to keep principles of rules going, and if the wording is bad or gets kind of timed out, it is incumbent on the government to rewrite them. And then this is very interesting too. This is on 50. D.C. Lau wrestles with we'll call it the modern problem. What's the modern problem? Well, he says it here. This is the second paragraph on 50 if you have your book. It's the conclusion of his right section. So let me read this first. It's the last sentence of the paragraph before, the two sentences before this. Thus, while a rule can remain right only if it's constantly measured against the demands of principles, a principle cannot do without rules if it is to be put into effect. AKA, every principle requires rules to have effect on reality. The dialogue between rule and principle constitutes the essence of Confucius's moral thinking. So there's a constant interplay. Now there's this quote here. Now in connection, I'm reading the book again, Confucius's approach may have something to offer in the debate, whether morals are objective or conventional. Conventional is another way to say, like, subjective. And objective, right? Objective means it's true regardless of the time and the place and how you feel about it. The argument runs something like this. If morality is conventional, it has no objectivity. One can only judge moral rules within the conventions of a given social system of which they are part. There is no way of adjudicating between different systems. On the other hand, if morality is objective, how can we come to know these objective realities poses epistemological problems. Epistemology, by the way, is the search for truth. So, the truth and how we know what we know. That's what epistemology is. So how, if morality is objective, which, again, repeating myself, but if it's true regardless, then how do we know? Well, this is his answer that he thinks Confucius answers it, and that's the quote here. All moral rules have implicit in them some principle or principles. A rule can thus be judged by its success in realizing those principles. In other words, moral rules have built-in standards by which they can be judged. And then he mentions that I didn't put on the slide, right? But if they're found wanting, the points to the way of their improvement. So any moral rule has to have a principle to judge it by. Now, there's a couple things missing here, right? Like, if we assume that logic exists and works, right? Suddenly we're getting back towards the objective again. But I don't think D.C. Lau is a subjectivist. I think he's arguing with the subjectivists. Now, Confucius generally believed in the value of students making their utmost efforts to think things out by himself or herself, but they were mostly men, so himself. So, like we already talked about in our discussion, right? Students were expected to do this. And then we get a little bit on Confucius the man. Now, if you looked in the back of the book, there's actually an appendix that's called Events in the Life of Confucius, which is all about things Confucius said about himself. So we kind of get a feeling about him. But D.C. Lau gives us his little conclusion about Confucius himself, what he's like as a man, and generally speaking, D.C. Lau gives him a pretty fair shake. Like, he seemed to really enjoy his life, even though he didn't have material success necessarily. He was very passionate about what he did, right? He loved his job, and he was into it, and, he just found joy in existence. And this last paragraph, I think, is worth quoting on 55. And the quote here is, "Anyone who has read the sayings of Confucius carefully and without prejudice will surely find it difficult to recognize the die-hard conservative and arch-villain that he has sometimes been made out to be. Confucius is, perhaps, yet another instance of the proverbial prophet." So again, those are strong words for something written in the last 100 years, right? People don't always take that strong of a moral stand. But DC is coming out hard on the pro-Confucian side, right? He is a proverbial prophet. And again, even if if one really disliked Confucius, there's an interesting counter-argument, which is something like this. The system he created basically held supremacy over China for 2,400 years, and then Korea for about 1,500, and Japan for almost as long, although less strong, and even northern Vietnam, right? Somehow this system persisted. Now, if it's completely horrible, how would it have done that? That's a great question, and I'm not going to answer that. But I'm going to leave it here. Any questions about this intro before we get into the meat? Because otherwise, we'll just get right into it. All right, we see good. Let's go. All right, and I'm trying to have a couple images to make it a little more spicy, considering we're online all the time, so you can look at some of these nice traditionalist images. Although this is almost Zen, but let's not tell the Confucius that. Okay, the Analects, the proper name of Confucius's book. Let's jump on in. And as I mentioned already, right, in the Discord, so if you didn't hear it, if there's any part of this you think I'm missing, or there's a part of each one of these sub-books that I'm not covering, feel free to holler it out at the end of each book little subsection, and I'll go read it and we'll talk about it too. So there's so much good stuff in here, as in, it's very easy to read, like it's a very short book, but it has a lot of substance. Okay, so book one has a bunch. I mean, I didn't even put in number like 1-1, but 1-1 is the master said, "Is it not a pleasure, having learned something, to try it out at due intervals? Is it not joy to have friends come from afar? Is it not gentlemanly? Oh, is it not gentlemanly not to take offense when others fail to appreciate your abilities?" I didn't put that on here, but you got to start with 1-1, right? I love the double negatives too, right? Not gentlemanly not to take offense. So it is gentlemanly to... Oh, no, it is not gentlemanly to not take offense. I love the double negative. My brain is always like, it's like math, right? So, but anyway, the ones I thought were highlights is 7 and 8. So 7, we'll read it and then I'll explain it, but I have kind of my summary on the screen, right? So 7 is, Suhisa said, It would grant that a man has received instruction who appreciates men of excellence, where other men appreciate beautiful women, who exerts himself to the utmost in the service of his parents, and offers his person to the service of his Lord, and who, in his dealings with friends, is trustworthy in what he says, even though he may say what he has never been taught. Right, and actually this is way more than just appreciating merit, right? This is how to appreciate excellence. And again, right, you appreciate excellent men, you serve your parents, don't get distracted by beautiful women, etc. 8 is something like self-correction and logic. The master said, quote, "A gentleman who lacks gravity does not inspire awe. A gentleman who studies is unlikely to be inflexible. Make your guiding principle to do your best for others and be trustworthy in what you say. Not to accept a friend anyone who is not good as you." Whoa, those are great fighting words. "And when you make a mistake, do not be afraid of mending your ways." So again, right, that's only 3 little sentences, but there's a lot in there, right? So, if you don't have gravity, you don't inspire awe, right? Gravity doesn't just mean pulling you towards the ground. This is much more like the gravitas, right, with Latin, right? You have a certain weightiness and thusness. That's what gravity means in this case, right? And inspiring awe, right? It's something like, yeah, that makes you, stand in shock and appreciation of it. And right, if you study, you're likely to be inflexible. And this is where we get some of our first footnotes, right? And where he starts making connections. But yeah, be trustworthy. Have friends at least as good as you. It's kind of acknowledgement of the principle that friends affect you. And then, right, when you're wrong, fix it. All right, let's see, 15. So we have Tzu Kung said, "Poor without being I can't even say this word, oh my goodness. Obsequious, wealthy without being arrogant. What do you think of this saying?" The master said, "That will do, but better still, poor, yet delighting in the way. Wealthy, yet observant of the rites." And then Tzu Kung said, quote, "The odes say, like bone cut, like horn polished, like jade carved, like stone ground." Is that not what you have said in case in point? And then that's where it ends. Man. So, again, right, we start to get this... Remember, somebody mentioned in our discussion, like, keeping separation, right? And again, the key here, too, was trying to tell people if you're poor and rich how you should act. But instead, even Confucius corrected him and said, "Poor, but delight in the way." So your money has no relationship to your morality. Again, is that kind of a dynamic idea? Yes. That's actually a big deal, right? There has been more than one society where your wealth is considered your morality. I'll give you an example. We live in a society where wealth is considered your morality. How can I point that out? people actually treat other humans better based on how much money they have. Now, it's not everywhere, but come on, folks. We live in LA County, or a lot of us do. I'd argue it's the biggest difference between shopping in Orange County and LA County. In Orange County, most of the rich people kind of dress, or they used to. Nowadays, it's kind of turning into LA. People used to, like, go shopping in flip-flops and sandals and shorts, and so you couldn't, like, treat people badly because you never knew who was who. But I feel like in LA, you have to, like, dress up to go shopping. So, but it's like, why, it doesn't matter, though. Why should we treat people different? And then even if you're wealthy, you have to be polite, follow the rights, respect your parents. Again, that is a moral commandment, which is pretty interesting. 16, which is the last one, is about honesty. It says, Master said, Sue, only with a man like you can one discuss the odes. Tell such a man something, and he can see its relevance to what he has been told. And the Master said, it is not the failure of others to appreciate your abilities that should trouble you, but rather your failure to appreciate theirs. So, honesty is kind of almost obscuring the meaning there. I should have been a little more direct. But again, right, that quote, it's almost like you should appreciate other people more than you worry about people not appreciating you. Again, we talked about this in the discussion, right? But it's very outward facing, right? Don't focus so much on yourself. Focus on others, right? That's a kind of it's a pretty big deal, morally speaking. Okay, book 1, anything you guys think I missed? I'll give it a bit while I don't talk, just so you guys have a chance to. And the process for this, just put like 1.5 or 1, I don't know, 10, and I can take a look at it. And you can give me a reason too, but if you just put it, I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it. But if you're all good, we'll let it sit. I'll give it 15 seconds. All right, we're good. Let's keep going. Oh, I see one. Somebody asked a good question. Let me do that. I'm excited. Oh no, did I move my bookmark? No, I didn't. Somebody asks, 112. What does he mean by harmony? Let me read 112. So, 112 is, Yu Tzu said, of the things brought about by the rites, harmony is the most valuable. Of the way of the former kings, this is the most beautiful, and is followed alike in matters great and small. Yet this will not always work. To aim always at harmony without regulating it by the rites, simply because one knows only about harmony, will not, in fact, work. So, harmony, we would think of harmony as like, not just musical harmony, but this is more like social harmony, right? So, of the things brought about by the rites, harmony is the most valuable. So, if we all, because remember, rites is like religious observance, custom observance, and being polite. So if we all have a common basis of, let's say, like religious, cultural, and politeness observance, it would literally make social harmony. And what doesn't make social harmony, right? If we all have very different customs, we're not harmonious, right? Like, I'll give you an easy one. Like, this one's super easy. Cultures that take their shoes off when they enter the house, and cultures that don't do that, right? Like, trying to navigate, it's way easier if it's all one or all the other, right? But if we go in each other's homes and we don't know if shoes are polite, that can be rough. Spoiler, in Asia, a lot of places it's rude to wear shoes inside buildings at all. I mean, a lot of traditional restaurants in Japan, you still have to take your shoes off. You used to go shopping in department stores, and you had to wear sandals. So again, right, stuff like that is rights, So the more those are everybody agrees on those, the more harmony one would have. But you can't have harmony without rights. That's what basically this means. And we're just think social harmony. So in the old days, let's just say we've had to add a lot of modifiers to our words, where something that used to be obvious was not necessarily obvious nowadays. That's a good question. All right. Let's keep going. Book 2. Number 3 is where I want to start. Guiding with virtue. So the Master said, guide them by edicts, and we already read this one, by the way, but I'm going to reiterate because it's so good. Guide them by edicts, keep them in line with punishments, and the common people will stay out of trouble, but will have no sense of shame. Guide them by virtue, keep them in line with rights, and they will, besides having a sense of shame, reform themselves. Right? That Confucian focus on personal following of the way is very important. And we already went over that one, but I wanted to reiterate because we're there, and it's a good one. And right next to it, actually I went out of order here. I don't know why. I'll have to fix that. It'll bug some OCD person. I'm a little OCD too, so it bugs me. Number 2, the master said, the odes are 300 in number. They can be summed up in one phrase: swerving not from the right path. So this is, remember we talked about allusion? This is him making an allusion to the odes, and it's about horses running, and it's a moral kind of comment, right? So that it's like a triple entendre almost. So that is very common in ancient Chinese, and we'll encounter it too as we go forth with Mencius as well. And it's in the we're not doing the Three Kingdoms. Sorry, Tale of the Heike. All right, 5, 6, and 7, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think they're all filial piety, but let me read them. So 5 is definitely is. So Meng Yizi asked about being filial. The master answered, never fail to comply. Fan Qi was driving. The master told him about the interview, saying, Men Sung asked me about being filial. I answered, never fail to comply. Fan Qi asked, what does that mean? I like these guys. The master said, quote, when your parents are alive, comply with the rites in serving them. When they die, comply with the rites burying them. Comply with the rites sacrificing to them. And so if you don't know anything about East Asian civilization, basically all of China and Japan and Korea, and I think all of Vietnam too, you're supposed to sacrifice to your ancestors at least once a year in your family gravesite. It's a religious observance. Now, don't get me wrong, people nowadays will be like, well, professor, it's more like custom than religion. Okay, it's still religion, right? You're sacrificing to the dead ancestors. So it's a big deal. The communists tried to get rid of it in China. They did a pretty good job, but it's come back. So, especially smaller families, right? It actually got more important. Like, don't let me be forgotten. Okay, Grandma, I'll go to your shrine once a year. So it's very big still, but it used to be humongous. Number 6, let me see. Oh yeah, so Meng Wu Po asked about being filial. So same question, right? So how do I respect my family? The master said, give your father and mother no cause for anxiety than illness. So besides getting sick, don't make your parents anxious. 7, again, we have another filial question from Tsuyu. And by the way, quick note, if you don't know any of these names and you start to get a little mixed up and confused, from page 237, there's actually a glossary of personal and place names. So they try to help you figure out who and where these people are. How would we know this? Because the book doesn't elaborate it. Well, like you said, right, this is a 2,500-year tradition. And actually, a lot like other traditions, it started as an oral tradition, right? So like Christianity, like Buddhism, it was written down eventually, but it was talked about first. So there's an extensive supplemental oral tradition that got written down as well. So this one is, so this one just, right, obviously don't give your parents anxiety. Makes sense. 7. Wait, did we do this? Oh yeah, so this is number 7. Suyu asked about being filial. The master said, nowadays, for a man to be filial means no more than he is able to provide his parents with food. Even hounds and horses, in some ways, are provided with food. If a man shows no reverence, where is the difference? Oof. So, being filial to your parents doesn't mean just feeding them, right? That's a pretty low bar. He's like, come on, guys, you feed your animals. You have to show them some reverence. Gotta respect that. And the final one, 8, the master says, what is difficult to manage is the expression of one's face. As for the young, taking on the burden when there is work to be done, or letting the old enjoy wine and the food when they are available, that hardly deserves to be called filial. So it's re-emphasizing the feeding them isn't that hard to ask. And control your face. If you ever wonder where that comes from, right, that is very classic in East Asia, the idea that you need to, like, control your outward expressions for the sake of your relationships. I would still say probably Japan is the most hardcore. Koreans are pretty good at it, and the Chinese do it, but especially Japan, it's an art form, I would say, controlling your emotions for the sake of social harmony. All right. The worthiness of teachers. Again, if we're in a teaching tradition, this is a religion and a philosophy, but it's very emphasized on teaching as a means of transmission. So we have to know about worthiness. So 11, the master said, a man is worthy of being a teacher who gets to know what is new by keeping fresh in his mind what he is already familiar with. So a good teacher both has to not forget what he has learned but also stay current and fresh. Right? So that's, again, makes sense, right? I'm sure every single one of you, and me too, have had teachers who you can see in their young, that when they were young and spry, they might have known a lot and been very energetic, but by their old age, they get a little bit set in their ways. Let's just say it that way. That's the nice way. And finally, 12. Oh, I love this. This is one of the shortest ones, but I love it personally. Okay, 12. The master said, "The gentleman is no vessel." Now, by itself, it doesn't mean anything, but if you read the footnotes, i.e., he is no specialist. Every vessel is designed for a specific purpose only. So this is an indirect critique of specialists, right? It's a double entendre. So don't be a vessel, right? You have to be kind of a generalist to be a gentleman. You can't just be good at one really obscure thing. Bang. And then 13. We already talked about putting words into action, but this is one of the places it comes from. Su Kung asked about gentlemen. The master said, "He puts his words into action before allowing his words to follow his action." So, act on the words you say. All right, a couple other ones. 17. This one's one of his most famous quotes, by the way. "What is knowledge?" The master said, "You," who's the guy's name, not you, Y-O-U. "You, shall I tell you what it is to know, to say you know when you know, and to say you know when you do not know, that is knowledge." So knowledge itself is self-honesty on what you know. And there's a Socrates quote we'll probably get to, where Socrates has a similar quote at a similar time period, which is something like, "Wisdom is knowing what you don't know." And then honesty as a rule. A duke asked, "What must I do before the common people look up to me?" Confucius answered, Raise the straight and set them over the crooked, and the common people will look up to you. Raise the crooked and set them over the straight, and the common people will not look up to you." So promote honest people to rule, basically, and then people will look up to you. Pretty easy. 21. This one's about family life and making the government rule better. Again, we talked about it, but it's an interesting one. Someone said to Confucius, quote, "Why do you not take the part in the government?" And the master said, quote, "The book of history says, oh, simply by being a good son and friendly to his brothers, a man can exert an influence upon government," unquote. In so doing, a man is, in fact, taking part in government. How is there any question of his having actively to, quote, "take part in government," unquote? Right? And this, somebody I mentioned earlier, representative government, for Confucian morality, they would actually say this system is representative, because by being a good friend and a good brother and good to your parents and a good husband, you are taking part in government. So no government can be good without good people. That is the base of Confucian morality. So it is representative, but in a moral sense, not in a political sense. So, all right, any questions about Book 2 or parts you think I missed? I'll give us 20 seconds. All right, we seem good. I'll keep going. If a question pops up, I'll answer it, though. All right, Book 3. In this one, 1 to 6 are all about significance of the rights. I'll give a couple examples. Like number 3, for example, and the first 2 are just somebody trying to basically take prestige from the imperial government, which he disapproves of. And then number 3 is the master said, "What can a man do with the rights who is not benevolent? What can a man do with music who is not benevolent?" So basically, just because you parrot a right, or you do a religious observance, doesn't give you righteousness. And again, he even thinks, like we talked about before, if a music itself isn't righteous, it's irrelevant, right? If it's not benevolent, who cares? And I'm skipping ahead a little bit on keeping old rituals. Here we go. So 17. Su Kung wanted to do away with the sacrificial sheep at the announcement of the new moon. The master said, Su, you are loath to part with the price of a sheep, but I am loath to see the disappearance of the right. And again, this is where we talked about in our discussion, self-interest, right? This guy has to do a sacrificial ceremony for a season, and he wants to save some cash. And Confucius is like, that's not a good reason to not do a proper observation of the seasons. And again, keeping the old rituals over self-interest, or money grubbing, right? 19. The ruler and rule obligations. So the Duke Ting asked, what is the way a ruler should employ the services of subjects? And we already did this one in the intro, but I'm bringing it back. What is the way a subject should serve the ruler? Confucius answered, the ruler should employ the services of his subjects in accordance with the rights. The subject should serve the ruler by doing his best. Doing your best comes back again. If you've ever heard the Japanese word gambaru, which literally means to do your best at something, I'll be honest, as an American, when I first heard that, it kind of tweaked me. I'm like, do your best, just do it or don't do it. But it's a very Confucian idea, right? Like, in trying to do your best, even if you fail, is better than, not doing, right? All right, something on past judgments. Oh, this is a long one. Okay. So 21, the Duke Ai asked Cao Wu about the altar of the god of earth. Cao Wu replied, the Xia used a pine, the Yin used the cedar, and the men of Chao used the chestnut, saying that it made the common people tremble. The master, hearing of this reply, commented, one does not explain away what has already been done. One does not argue against what is already accomplished, and one does not condemn what has already gone by. And this one I think is just, don't get too caught up on the past. And now that's interesting too, because again, Confucius trying to be an arch, conservative villain. He's sure not doing a good job at that. 25 we already did. This is the quote for perfect, the Shao and the Wu are the two kinds of music, and one is perfectly good and one is perfectly beautiful and good, where perfect good is always better than perfect beauty. So that's pretty easy. Yeah. Book 3, any comments or questions on Book 3 or parts you think I missed? And I'll give this one 15 seconds or 20 seconds. And yes, I realize our pace is a little slow. That's fine. The discussion was worth it. We'll probably get to 5 or 6. Man. There we go. I thought my stream name didn't update, and that made me sad. I see a person typing. Finish your question. I'll answer it when it pops up. All right, let's keep going. Nope, I see the question. For 16, I don't think he's talking about physical strength, correct? Let me check. Let's see, quote, the master said, in archery the point lies in not piercing the hide. For the reason that strength varies from man to man. This is the way of antiquity. Oh, yeah, well this one, if you look at the footnote, it talks about a bullseye of the target. So it's like he's making some allusion here that it is talking about. The quote is talking about physical strength, but the implication here in the setting is it's also talking about like moral correctness. So it's not like. So I guess the way to make this a moral statement, right? He's not literally talking about being able to pierce the hide of a target. He's talking about like morality. It's better to be correct than like making strong action. I'm sure that is one of the moral ways to read this, right? The exegesis of the morality. So the quote is talking about physical strength, but Confucius is making the moral point of it's better to be correct than like especially vigorous in your action. Because one of the old meanings of a word like sin is to like miss the target in English, right? So there's this idea that's not like sin or incorrectness is like missing that, you're kind of missing the target. So that's a very old analogy from the West, actually. So it actually fits the East, too, which is quite interesting. That's a good question, April. Okay. Let's go to book 4, which we'll probably finish on book 4 today, I'm not going to lie. All right, 10 and 11. Let's do these two. 10, this is a great quote. I'm just going to read it before I even read my slide. The master said, "In his dealings with the world, the gentleman is not invariably for or against anything. He is on the side of what is moral." Oof. So Confucius is not for team sports, or even, let's say, the Reds versus the Blues in politics. Righteousness is his consideration. What is moral and correct is what a gentleman should follow, not what team you're on. And Confucius, like everybody else, struggled with the exact same thing throughout their whole history. But the ideal is you should always err on the side of righteousness. And then 11, the master said, quote, "If one is guided by profit, one's actions will incur much ill will." Remember what we're talking about? Confucius might not be a capitalist. This is where you start to get that indication, right? And again, this one is just kind of obvious on the face of it, even though we don't have to think about it. Like, imagine you have a cousin or a friend, but not a good friend, like a second-tier friend, and every time you see them, they're trying to hustle, like, insurance, right? They're trying to sell you insurance, and you know you don't need it. And they know you don't need it, but they just want to make money off you, right? That literally is true, right? You get ill will from people when one's action. So if one is guided by profit, it doesn't say if one makes profit, right? You're allowed to make profit in Confucian thought, but if your guiding principle is profit, you get a lot of ill will. Seems true on the face of it. All right, 12. Oh yeah, we get another morality quote. I skipped 11. Oops. I flipped them around. I read 12 first. Sorry about that. 11 is, quote, "While the gentleman cherishes benign rule, the small man cherishes his native land. While the gentleman cherishes respect for law, the small man cherishes generous treatment." Right? So this basically says, right, a gentleman wants a good rule, and a gentleman wants respect for the law. A small man, a non-moral man, that's what a small man means, right? You cherish your native land above everything, you're jingoist, basically, and a small man cherishes generous treatment, aka the small man, the amoral man, or the immoral man, wants exceptions from the law, doesn't want the law to apply to him, but everybody else. That one, number 11, that's what I just read, that one definitely has modern implications. We live in a two-tier system, and it doesn't even really matter your political affiliation, right? Like, it's demonstrable that there is at least 2 tiers to our legal system. So we could say we have a lot of small people in the way that people who aren't concerned with morality primarily and justice. So, all right, 16. This one's on gentlemanly morals. So let me read this. And this is another great short one that's just a gut punch. Okay, and it's almost like book 4 is the prophet book. So the master said, quote, "The gentleman understands what is moral. The small man understands what is profitable." Again, laughing because there's something above profit, right? And again, that is inherently anti-capitalist. Somebody mentioned before about capitalism, right? Because capitalism by itself is just maximizing profit, right? And freedom of friction to make profit. Confucius would just say, no, you don't understand. There's something above the profit motive, right? The profit motive is not the end. There's something above it, right? And so anybody saying there's anything above profit is an inherent critique of profit, because you're saying profit is not a moral end. Bang. Okay. Now 17, on self-examination. This one's a little longer. The master said, "When you meet someone better than yourself, turn your thoughts to becoming his equal. When you meet someone not as good as you are, look within and examine your own self." So both of these become self-judgments, right? So when you look at somebody better and you don't envy them, try to be as good as them. And you see somebody worse than you or not as good as you are, look at your own self and see what you could improve. Don't just judge them. Again, these aren't bad principles even if you're not a Confucius, right? Like, as general self-improvement, that's a point. All right. 22, keeping your word. Pretty straightforward, right? The master said, in antiquity, men were loath to speak. That means like hesitant. This was because they counted it as shameful if their person failed to keep up with their words. So they didn't speak too much, so it was easier to keep your word. And that is Book 4. Any questions or parts of Book 4 you think I missed? Oh, there's one more I wanted to do. 24. Yeah, I don't want to skip this one. But yeah, if you have one, please type it. 24 is, quote, the master said, the gentleman desires to be halting in speech, but quick in action. So this is funny for a guy whose his job is a teacher, right? But if you notice, a lot of his phrases are really snappy and short. This does kind of match his personality. So it's this idea, don't speak too much, act, and act quickly. And is that still relevant now? Would we prefer people who yell on Twitter or do something? Or you have a friend who talks a big game and a friend who acts. Which one is preferable? Something to think about. All right, any parts of this that people want to add to? And if not, you can save it for next time. We are slow, which is wonderful. All right, but we're still going to do our journal because I feel like it. All right, and the journal is not mind-blowing. It's an elaboration on our discussion we had today and reading this. And I'm going to read it, and then I'll explain what I want you to do, and then how to be submitted, and we'll be free. So the journal is this. And it, by the way, after I read it, if you don't, to get it again, just open the stream and open the last minute. You can just pause the stream. So it is now that we have studied the introduction and some of the fundamentals of Confucian thought, what are some early judgments you can make about it as a system? Does it create a system that is somewhere you'd like to live? Why or why not? So not just like the very hyper-specifics or the generalities we talked about before. Now, applying those, what kind of system do you think this makes? Like, it doesn't matter how much history you know. Just use your logic. Apply it to today. What kind of system would this make in contrast to our current system? And then, genuinely, right, does it create a place you'd like to live? Again, you don't have to say it's the best place to live. That's not what I'm asking. I said like to live, right? You don't have to live there forever. Just, is it horribly reprehensible? Is it decent? Is it pretty good? And then give me some reasoning for it. Students always ask me about length. Length is appropriateness to answer the question. So what's inappropriate? Probably one sentence. What's too long? Probably 4 pages is too long, right? A page-ish, double-spaced typed or handwritten. Submission, you're going to submit it on a Dropbox, which I'll have up by Friday probably. So there'll be a Dropbox on Beachboard. Also for next class, finish Confucius. We're going to get as far as we can. If we do not finish the entire book, I'm okay with that. We don't have to. I want to give us a good feeling for it. And then next Thursday, we're starting Plato's Republic. Yes! I'm excited. If you've never read Plato's Republic, this is your chance. I wish somebody would have forced me to read Plato's Republic. I had to read it on my own. But I love it. Right at this point, I read Plato's Republic at least probably once a year if I can. Once every 2 years if I have to. But the last 3 summers, I think I've read it just to keep it fresh. So that's what we're doing next week. Any questions or problems? I know we're over time. Any questions or problems I'll answer in the Discord. Otherwise, you are free. Thank you for watching, especially if you're a random person. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week. Have a great weekend.